Would you please check your ideas and opinions at the door? All your philosophical and religious views, all your logic, because I say check it at the door advisedly because you can pick it up again when you go out if you feel unsafe without it. I'm not trying to argue you out of your opinions and views. I'm merely suggesting that for the sake of an experiment, you temporarily suspend them.
Hello and welcome to the Philosophical Minds podcast, an exploration of all things philosophical, alchemical, and esoteric, from the psycho-spiritual to the material-chemical nature of the all. Join me and my guests as we inquire into the liminality of mind and matter, and tend to the fertile soils of awareness and perception while facilitating an expanded consciousness from the individual to the collective. If you enjoy the show and find it of value, consider supporting and becoming a patron via the Patreon at patreon.com/philosophicalminds. A small contribution makes a big difference and definitely makes it easier for me to continue the show, although I will always do my best to keep it flowing regardless. Thank you all, and let's get into it. All right. Today I am connected with a free-spirited global nomad, esoteric adventurer, and fringe dweller, Susan Evans, or Susie. I'm very excited. I think we both share a passion for symbolism, for sure. Before we get into it, is there anything that you would like to add about yourself for the listeners?
Other than that, I am a fringe dweller, a truth seeker, a questioner, and I also enjoy symbolism and have luckily had the ability to travel around and see lots of different sites and check out several different symbols. I was always a questioner, as I said, so that was kind of the driving force for looking into the symbolism once I started traveling. But yes, I have always loved the sense of adventure and traveling, and I've done it pretty much since I was a kid, moved around a lot with my family, and we go on a lot of, little trips around California or the United States. And then later on, it just turned into wanting to adventure to foreign lands. And voila.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of people that obviously love to travel around the world. Obviously, there's beautiful places and discovering interesting cultures, but you're definitely doing it in a very thoughtful way. I wonder, is there a place that you call home? Do you have a place that feels the most at home to you?
Well, during the pandemic, I had a home in Turkey. And so that's where I spent most of my time. And I would say, yeah, for several years, that was the home base. Now it has become the United States. And I actually am kind of reintegrating back into the States. So it's almost kind of like a reverse culture shock. So I was experiencing that a bit when I went back in February. And to be honest, this trip to England that I'm doing right now, which started in Italy and is going to end in Turkey in August and go back to the States in September, is probably going to be my last trip for this year. I'm really feeling a pull to come back to my own country. So I have a feeling that the United States is going to be my home base for a bit. I need to see some things around my own country.
Yeah, that's really cool. Have you always considered yourself a truth seeker? Could you elaborate on maybe a little bit of the importance of seeking truth and kind of what that means to you?
Right. I think I've just always been a questioner since I was a young child. I questioned authority. I questioned the religious schools that I went to, and maybe that was what made me start to seek truth, to understand religion a little bit more. Especially as I got older, I started to understand it a bit more, especially with the symbolism. And for me, it's just to understand myself and to understand my part in the world, also what I can contribute, and to understand my relationships with other people.
Love that. So I want to talk about Saranda, Albania, one of the posts that I had seen you wrote was in Albania, and you're exploring the principles of natural law. And it was cool because you quoted the Kybalion. The Kybalion is one of my favorite books, and it definitely has had an impact on me in the way that I view things. So I was curious if you could touch on any of the insights that you had in regard to your time in Saranda, or aside from Saranda, even just in general, reflecting on things like natural law and the importance of understanding natural law on a deeper level.
Well, when I was in Saranda, I took a walk one day, and it was a bit of a challenging walk for me because I was a bit in fear of some sea creatures that were in the ocean. And so I kind of had this reflection of not to live my life in fear, but to jump into the water and have the experience. And to me, that was a bit of an experience with natural law. I mean, there was kind of this ebb and flow of the tide that was going out, and this awareness that I needed to operate with that ebb and flow when I was feeling the fear of going into the water with the sea urchins. And that's kind of what I had felt at the moment.
Do you ever have conversations where things like natural law come up and people are just kind of, maybe they hadn't heard that term before? And I'm wondering if somebody were to ask you, what do you mean? Like, what is natural law? How would you like generally respond?
Yeah, I have had people kind of look at me strange about it. And I think I just try to describe it as best I can as, being in line with the laws of nature, living in a moral way, do upon others as you would wish to do upon you, as above, so below. So, what you do and feel and believe is what is going to manifest out into the physical realm. And so that's pretty much how I explain it.
I love that. In terms of symbolism, Albania's flag, I think it has the double-headed eagle. I
Yeah.
think there's some others. I think Serbia, Moldova, and I think Egypt. But aside from the flags, the double-headed eagle symbolism and it's pretty like dominant in terms of its historical significance. And so I was just curious, like if you could lend any insight into anything that you may have learned about that symbolism and what it represents historically, or anything about that.
Yeah. As I recall, what I had learned about the double-headed eagle was it was related to Constantine, and it had something to do with the coins that he distributed during his era as well. Later on, I believe it was adopted by Freemasons, and that's why you see it quite a bit in a lot of like the St. John Co-Cathedral in Malta and various cathedrals that belong to the various Chivalric orders.
One of the posts that you had on, I think it was Esoteric Italy, you visited the St. Clement's Basilica, and you talked about how it was built on top of a 4th century church, which in turn was built on top of a 1st century pagan temple. I wanted to explore a couple of things about this. One was Mithraism. It's something that I don't know a whole lot about, and it's on my kind of endless list of things to look into. Maybe you could discuss a little bit about Mithraism, or what is Mithraism?
Yeah, Mithraism seemed to me, when I started to investigate it, to have a similar story to Jesus. So that's why I thought that it was interesting when I was in a Christian church to find the lower part, almost kind of what we would consider the basement, to be connected to a Christian church, but to see a pagan, previous pagan religion have its temple down below. And that's something that I found quite a bit in a lot of churches. So that was fascinating. I know that in another church just recently in Venice, I saw a pyramid that enclosed the heart of the man who was buried in that tomb. It was actually just his heart that is encased in the pyramid. And that really made me think of the story of the Bacchic rite, which has to do with Dionysus or Mithra, all of that. And it made me think of that because the Titans represent the material, physical, irrational aspect of the world. And the other one represents the rational aspect of the world. And so, yeah, I just always found it really, really interesting that some of these pagan gods, solar gods, are similar to Jesus, and you can actually see this being exposed in the churches themselves. Now, in regards to Mithra, the religion or practices that were involved in it, I'm not too savvy about that, but was able to view some things that kind of pointed out that there were previous things going on, similar stories, just in the architecture of churches previous to Christianity.
Was this a common pattern historically, this building on top of other holy sites? Because I've heard, for example, like St. Patrick's Day, basically it roots to the elimination of pagans by St. Patrick. I think the way it was described in stories in the past, they would say that St. Patrick was eliminating the snakes from Ireland. In reality, what was actually happening was he was basically genociding out the pagan population. So this kind of thing, it seems to be very indicative of a sort of like old school religious war, and maybe the aim to sort of erase or write over history. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that's true. I mean, you can just see it in the architecture alone, but then why do certain things like, Christianity, then other solar gods have a similar story? I think that Michael Tessarian has talked about the cults of the world coming together to have hegemony. One didn't want another one to have hegemony over it, so instead they came together so then they could, kind of all have the ability to rule. And so that is an interesting concept, which would probably explain why one, St. Patrick was brought in to, eradicate the Druids and that ideology. So then kind of that maybe this more controlling sense would come in,
Yeah. Could you maybe elaborate or touch a little bit on the Bacchic rite?
Yeah. From my knowledge, the Bacchic rite has to do with the Titans basically cut up into pieces the physical being of Dionysus or Bacchus. And that represented the irrational in the end. What was left was his heart, which is the rational. And they basically were able to lure him to be able to do that because giving him a mirror to basically admire himself or look at himself in the mirror. And I believe, like what I was saying, the cutting him up into pieces, his body, ended up being the rational aspect of the human condition. And then the heart not being able to be disposed of was the representation of rationality. So you either are going to be a Titan in life, or you're going to be Bacchus in life, which is the heart and rational. So which path are you going to take?
Yeah. And what are your thoughts on, paganism and what it means and the demonization of paganism in general? Like, kind of how do you frame all that in your mind?
I would say that I would probably lean more towards paganism. I'm not a pagan myself. I really have no religious affiliation, but from my knowledge, they were nature worshipers. And I don't see anything wrong with that. But I do believe they were eradicated, and some of their beliefs were incorporated into various religions, especially Christianity. But they probably aligned more with Hermetic principles than I would say what we see today, which is in a lot of religions, which is leaning more towards Gnosticism.
Definitely. Just to shift gears a little bit.
Yeah.
I love to explore like any aspects of anything basically related to alchemy or alchemical subject matter, modern or historical. I love it all. Talk to me a little bit about was it Porta Alchemica, the alchemist's store in Rome? That was
All right.
something that I had seen you post. I liked that.
Yeah. That was one where one day I just decided to go out, and I had seen online that there was this interesting place that had this mysterious door. And so I took a long stroll through Rome and ended up at this park, brick style building. Inscribed on the door, this mysterious door, various alchemical symbols. It once had been the villa of Massimo Palombara, and he kind of ran in Rosicrucian circles. He and his friends would often get together in a laboratory and run alchemical experiments. And they were looking for the philosopher's stone. One day, a mysterious man showed up on Massimo's front door and introduced himself, said he could help Massimo find the philosopher's stone, and ended up creating the gold. And then he disappeared. And so after that, there was a little inscription on a piece of paper that was left along with the bits of gold that had been transmuted from base metals by this mysterious individual. And they were alchemical symbols that Massimo had never seen before and couldn't really decipher. So Massimo decided to put it on a door in hopes that somebody would come along and be able to decipher it and then reveal the philosopher's stone. And that was pretty much the story. The property itself is pretty dilapidated, but the door still remains. And I thought that it was a pretty cool little nifty place to visit because it was off the beaten path and had some interesting alchemical connections.
Wow, I love all that stuff. That's so cool. Aside from that, how was Rome? It's a place I've always wanted to visit, and in person, I would imagine it's obviously a lot more amazing than it is viewing it online. So I'm just curious, was there any other aspects that struck you or that you found noteworthy, or how could you lend any insight into that?
Sure. Rome is a beautiful city. It's very vibrant, great food, lots of beautiful people. They love art, they love music, they love experience. It's such a lively city. It's a wonderful place to go. But I would suggest people to, of course, go to all of the ancient sites, go to the Vatican. There's a lot of symbolism there. The time that I was there, I didn't get to go, but several years before I had the chance to. You could spend several days there. That would be, amazing for anybody that's interested in symbols. Of course, the Capitoline Hill is very interesting. There's the catacombs, which are the underground caves where the Christians hid when the Romans were persecuting them. There's all kinds of places to visit in Rome, but I felt like going back to the alchemical door, that one was very special.
Yeah, for sure. I think it was maybe a month ago, you posted a photo of the Church of Santa Maria Maddalena in Venice. I love the architecture and the looks of the stone symbolism, and I actually used it in one of my video intros. Could you talk a little bit about the structure and that symbolism that's kind of encoded within that structure? it has the eye on it, and then it was, I think it said wisdom built this house herself or something along those lines. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, it was. And I think the interior of it was dedicated to Mary Magdalene, apparently, and they often do ceremonies there, but you're not allowed entry. And it's very much associated with the Freemasons, which makes sense for the all-seeing eye encapsulated in the pyramid or the triangle.
Yeah, and this is fun because there's many people who are like afraid of that symbol because they may have particular associations, which I think, it might be sort of culturally inverted perspectives a lot of the time. And so I was wanting to ask you about that. What is your personal perspective as far as analyzing that symbol and what it means? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't necessarily think that probably from ancient times that it has any kind of negative connotation. I'd say maybe in more modern times it has, with any kind of conspiracy theories, or if there's an association with Freemasons or the hijacking of Freemasonry. But I don't feel that it really ultimately has a negative connotation. It just means the eye of God watching is basically what it means to me.
Yeah. Yeah. The more I look to history of anything, it continuously just blows my mind. How deep and layered everything becomes, and how the common narratives that we hear, they often are distortions or diversions from the actual reality of things. And I wonder, what are some fascinating things that you've discovered about history that you feel maybe were very surprising? Are there some things that you've learned that you say to yourself, wow, people have no idea? Or is there some things that you've come across that you've just found very surprised about?
Yeah, I think that getting into some of the Druidic aspects of Christianity and seeing, just the other day, I saw a yew tree outside of a church here in England where I'm staying. There's a church that was built in 1092 that's right across the street. And I started to investigate it and look into it and see that there's definitely a Druidic past that was associated with tree worship long before. And that when, as you were saying earlier, St. Patrick was brought in to, kind of eradicate the Druidism and the pagan religion, the tree worship was really, a big thing. So now in today's day, you can find yew trees placed almost purposely in the courtyard or the graveyard of churches. And so that to me is kind of a symbolism showing that, yeah, some of the history that we're told that, Christianity is the end all be all is a lie. And that there were pagan religions long before. And there's symbols like the yew tree sitting in the yard to really kind of represent that and show that.
Wow. Yeah, that's really cool. I don't know off the top of my head. I'm not sure what a yew tree looks like, but I'm going to have to look that up. That is interesting.
Yeah, it kind of looks almost like a cypress, but really full. And when you look at the leaves themselves, they almost look like a flat pine needle.
Okay. So something that I recently reflected on was kind of like this notion of like the shattering of the patriarchy, or like the dissolution of the male dominated patriarchal structure, and how so many movements, like so many movements, the pendulum has a tendency to swing a little bit far to the opposite direction, and counter movements will often course correct but end up taking things a little bit to the opposite end of the spectrum. So like with the patriarchy, I've heard and I've seen movements of this exact thing where there's a proposal or desirous inclination towards the ideal replacement structure being better off a matriarchy, and then they will make the case as to why women are superior, just the same way some dudes attempted to make the case as to why men were superior. And it's just so funny to me. People are missing the point. Anyway, I bring this up because it reminded me of an old quote that you had posted by Manly P. Hall, and it said, "Neither matriarchy nor patriarchy alone can ever rule the world well, but when these two join forces, then the affairs of the world will be run as wisely as those of the gods. Then the lords of compassion will join with the lords of reason in molding the destiny of the universe." So I read that and I'm just like, yes, precisely. I wanted to see if you could maybe lend any insight into that and your thoughts on that.
Well, I'd agree. I think that there has to be a balance in anything. And since you're into Hermeticism and alchemy, I'm sure you understand that. I mean, currently, I'm reading a book that's very much describing the importance of not going completely to the feminine side and not going completely to the masculine side, but finding that center. I think it's been described as 0 point. It's been described as the anima and animus balance. It's been described in many, many different ways. I don't like the polarization that's been happening for quite some time. Men and women in their physical being and in this physical world need to work together. We don't need to be separating. And I think there's definitely a certain political ideology that's running in the world today that is pushing very much a leave behind that kind of balance of the anima and the animus. And I'm not on board with that personally.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most important, at least at this time. It seems like it's something really important that should be discussed more, that kind of balancing factor, because like you said, with the polarization, it's obviously, one end of the spectrum to the extreme end of the other obviously never gets you where you want to be, which is that harmonized balance that you find when you unite the both.
Well, I know that in recently when I was in a church in Chester, England, which is a very old city that has some beautiful Tudor architecture. I was in the oldest church there. It actually predates the Chester Cathedral. It was the original church. They had a symbol of the unicorn and the lion, which was very representative of just this idea of balance. The sun was the lion, which is masculine, and the unicorn is the moon, which is feminine. And so you see all of this message and symbolism, and it can be seen in churches and all over the place. So, it's right there in front of our face. But I feel like the media and, governments like to push this separation. And it's important as individuals to be able to understand the importance of balance so we don't get mind manipulated into these ideologies.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of like that divide and conquer strategy we got to be mindful of.
Yes.
You mentioned the unicorn symbolism. Is that something common, or is it kind of rare, like to be seen encoded in some of these structures, or have you seen that
I've
often?
seen them in several Templar sites. I saw one in the chapel in Metz, France. It was actually inside an 8-pointed star. So that was very interesting because both are feminine. I didn't see a lion alongside with that one. And then I have seen it on several like coats of arms whenever I'm in like a royal palace or in a church, even sometimes on a government building.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, something that kind of seems like a common thread that I find within a lot of your stuff is it seems to be a lot of Templar sites or Templar related imagery.
Mhm.
Who were the Templars, and what were their role in history? What kind of interesting history have you learned about the Templars and how they kind of shaped things?
Yeah, I believe that the ancient Templars were definitely Hermeticists. I think what ended up happening with them was they were hijacked, basically, and kind of eradicated for that principle right there. And then that's when we got more of the despotic kind of stuff that we see going on today. They did dissolve into other orders, like the Knights Hospitaller, and their property went into there after the 1300s when they were supposedly eradicated for their heretical, behavior. Uh, and so they have dissolved into other orders, and so they have connections, I believe, to the Knights of Malta and the Knights Hospitaller, the Knights of St. John. And I think that if you want to go conspiratorial with it, I do.
Let's go there.
I do feel that they have the hijacked version of them that we have today. That probably leans a little bit more towards Gnosticism ideologies. I don't feel like the original Templars were that. I feel like they were Hermeticists, had quite a lot of knowledge. But the ones today, when you see some of the ideologies that are pumped out on the world stage, which is very Gnostic to me, because it's about escaping one's physical body. So you get the New Age movement, you get the aliens are going to come and save us. You get the religion, there's a savior that's outside that's going to come and save you all. I'm starting to use that as a study. And I think that my study of the Templars and the hijacked version of the Freemasonry has really kind of made me realize that. And for me personally, it makes me realize what I buy into is the spiritual ball of wax. And so I need to study it, the difference between the Hermeticism and just the Gnosticism, and understand it so I can be able to identify any ideologies that are pretty much BS and leading me
Yeah.
down a false path.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because I guess it's kind of hard for me to parse out any sort of general consensus in terms of Gnosticism because I hear a little different perspectives from a lot of different people on Gnosticism and what it all is.
Mhm.
But I would agree with you with some of those issues that you had mentioned in terms of things like escapism mentality and stuff like that, in terms
Yeah.
of escaping this body. Is there any other sort of criticisms that stand out to you that you've come across in terms of Gnosticism?
I'd say that's all. I think that there's bits of it that have Hermetic principles. And when it does, then it's good. But otherwise, I don't really want to escape my physical body or look outside of myself for
Yeah,
any savior.
for sure. um, so I'm sure that you're aware a lot more than myself in the realm of like things like elite bloodlines or kind of like ruling families that seem to have maintained a gigantic amount of influence over the masses. And we hear about these families like the Rothschilds, the Red Shields, or like the Rockefellers, the Passeurs, the Collins elite, and that there's a ton of them. And there's a lot of cases to be made. But anyway, I wonder if you have a conception or if you have formed any kind of conception about your view of the world and if you see it as somewhat of a hierarchical system of order like somewhat of a pyramid where there are individuals or families or corporations at like high levels influencing lower level groups, that ultimately kind of act as disseminators of change, or like, for the globe or on a global scale. So I guess, how do you kind of look at the world in that regard?
Well, I do think that there are elite families that do run the world. I mean, I kind of learned that through studying the Templars and the various chivalric orders. But of course, that stems more from the hijacked Freemasonry that I was speaking about. Yes, I do think that there's different levels, hierarchical levels. I think that probably some are more disposable than others, but may not think that they are. And ultimately, I think that what I've come to the conclusion with my travels and studying some of the symbolism and the history of the Templars and the Knights of Malta and whatnot, is that, and how the power elite operate on the world stage and pull the strings, we also have a part to do in it, because we ultimately allow it. And yes, they have a very, very distinct understanding of the human mind, better than we do ourselves, maybe even, and play off of that. But we also have a great will and can end that. And what if we are actually creating that monster based on our level of consciousness? So it's to take back responsibility also on us, and not just point the finger and say, oh, it's them, it's them, it's them, because there's always a dance in things, I feel. And that's what I've come to learn from my travels and studying these things. Because yes, there was a time where I pointed the finger and I said, oh, it's all them, it's all them. But then there has to be a time where you have to look at yourself. And probably that balance of anima and animus has a lot to do with that. And that's why we see all of this, what you were speaking of earlier, trying to drive people away from that.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think that kind of speaks to the notion of sovereignty, individual sovereignty, and individual responsibility, which are a couple other things that probably need to be emphasized and embedded in the education of the people at large. Because like
Yeah.
you say, it's we could point fingers all day, but we laugh at the comical hilarity of the leaders, yet they are leaders that we have elected. And that's not to say that there may have been shenanigans within elections, which is very plausible, but still,
Right.
I mean, the candidates themselves are largely built up and held up by a large majority of the population itself. So I
Right.
agree with you 100% on that. So you have visited a lot of churches and cathedrals and sacred structures, and there's so much discussion about the geobiological like implications of these structures in terms of like specific locations that they were built at, like the energetic or electromagnetic signatures of these locations, and whether they were strategically built in alignment with particular planetary alignments in mind. And there's a lot of like discussion about the origins and how this technology may have been essentially maybe used like in terms of some of these cathedrals with the organs, maybe they were used as like healing instruments, and with the acoustics within the cathedrals, maybe they could fashion and amplify and contain the sound waves, allowing it to basically kind of like permeate an individual at the cellular level to facilitate like a healing. And so I'm just curious, like, how do you feel about these notions, and how do you feel about those particular potentialities as somebody who has spent a lot of time within a lot of these structures and kind of engaging them?
I would say that I haven't investigated that exactly myself, but it sounds intriguing and I wouldn't doubt it. Now, I did visit one church when I was in Tuscany. It was rural Tuscany outside of Montalcino. And to this day, the structure is used by monks for chanting. And I did have the chance to sit in on that chant session. And I can say that it definitely was a very, very interesting and expansive experience. So I'm sure that that was carried on in their knowledge from previous times, because, you know, as you said, most of these churches were built on top of other sacred sites previously. So I wouldn't doubt that they were carrying on that. Even if they didn't have an exact awareness of it, it was happening.
Yeah, definitely. I always love to explore those lines of inquiry. So interesting. I don't know if I'm remembering correctly. Have you been to the Czech Republic and Prague?
I did go to Prague.
You
I
did?
spent
Okay.
one day in Prague, yes.
Okay.
It was a whirlwind trip.
My soul has some kind of inclination towards Prague. I'm not really sure what it is. It might be with the alchemical connections. But I mean, you spent one day there. I'm curious, is there anything that stood out to you, or what was that experience like for you?
I think pretty much I saw the main square, which was filled with all kinds of things. And I'm sure that any of the alchemical symbolism that you would be interested in would be located in that area, because there's all kinds of churches, there's all kinds of monuments. But there was an astronomical clock that I could recommend people to go and check out. It was pretty amazing. It was quite old and still in operation. Had all of the zodiac signs on it. It was pretty impressive.
Wow. Yeah, I think I've seen photos of that. That's really cool. Within all of your travels, everywhere you've been so far, what are a couple places that have stuck with you that, I don't know, maybe you'd say they were your favorite, or really impacted you deeply?
I would say my time in Ecuador was really special. That was probably the beginning of adventuring to go live in other countries, because I ran a restaurant with my family there, my parents and my brother, and did that for several years, learned Spanish, was able to make lots of friends. And it really challenged me as kind of an introverted type person to really kind of put myself out there and socialize, and learned another language. I also really enjoyed France. France was really special. And I'd say that was the time when I was really expanding my knowledge on symbols and getting into the Templar sites. Everything seemed to really flow nicely when I was there, which made kind of a confirmation to me that I was on a special journey. So France will always be super special to me for that. I've always enjoyed Italy quite a lot. I love the history, but I also love the people. They have a zest for life and a love for art and a love for love, which is really special and wonderful. And also really enjoyed my time in Turkey. There's always these stereotypes that we receive in the West about Muslim countries or countries in the East. Oh, don't go there. It's dangerous, blah, blah, blah. Not at all. An amazing experience, lovely people. And it was actually a really great place to be during the pandemic. Was living by the sea, very affordable to live there. And just from, everyday kind of basic needs, very, very affordable for groceries and great medical care. You'd be surprised. I mean, in the States, it's very expensive for medical care, and our medical system is pretty much in the dumps. But in Turkey, I got health insurance for about $100 for 1 year. And I ended up getting vertigo during the pandemic all of a sudden. And I went to the hospital, to the emergency room, and they didn't charge me. It cost nothing.
Wow.
So that was a really great and really, really professional doctors. They're trained over in the United States and Europe, and then they come back to their home country and provide service for their citizens. So it's a great place.
That makes me wonder, kind of like along those lines, spending a lot of time in these different places, reflecting on the United States and our systems. And are there some issues that really stand out to you that you feel like some systems and the way that they operate are noticeably not quite where they could be? And what are some of the things that you've noticed, or the systems that seem very efficient in other countries that you visited, that you'd recommend maybe we adopt, or yes, some things along those lines for the United States that you could see would benefit?
Well, I can say that our health system, I don't really know how to go about fixing that because I don't know the ins and outs, but somehow the country of Turkey, that's, the big bad East, somehow has worked out to make that work. So, and operate and function well for its citizens. Do I like socialized medicine? Not so much, because the NHS in England, I know, has its own problems. I mean, at least in the States, if a doctor does something wrong, you can sue them. In a socialized system, you cannot. So, pick which one. But I think that in regards to our medical system, definitely a lot of the big corporate pharmaceutical companies have too much say and clout and buy off politicians and just full-fledged corruption. And that has to end. That would be probably the first step to take. I think it's probably happened all over the world, but especially in the West. So that would be something to alleviate. I did really like the laid back attitude of South America, but I didn't like it so much when I was trying to do business. So I'd say in regards to doing business, America has it pretty much down. We have great service, things are on time. At least that's what I experienced, when I was there in February through May. So that's not a long time to be there, but I am going to go back and I will see how I feel about that. What else? Well, they had wonderful roads in some of these other countries, maybe not Albania, but in Ecuador, there were pretty good roads, at least for the main freeways. We could use a little bit of help with that in California. I don't know if you are located in the West, but I remember when I lived in San Diego, it was pretty bad.
Yeah. I'm out here in Arizona, so not too far.
Yeah. I lived in Arizona for a while too.
Yeah. Have you ever visited Spain?
Yes, I have. I've been to Barcelona, Madrid, Ibiza several times.
Wow. Yeah, I used to have a big map of Spain and Portugal because it's one of the places that I've always wanted to visit. And I think that, I don't remember if it's Spain or Portugal, that has that really beautiful big bridge. It's like a stone bridge. You might know what I'm talking about. I'm not sure. And there's like a waterfall behind it, and it's just beautiful. But Spain is another one of those places that stands out to me a lot. And kind of like what you're speaking to about things moving a little bit slower, from what I've heard from a lot of people that have traveled to Spain or Portugal, is that it's very relaxed, almost too relaxed.
It is.
So
they enjoy siesta, which can be a little strange to us because maybe at 1 or 2 in the afternoon, we want to get a snack or something like that, and the tienda is closed, or they eat really late in the evening. And so, we're not usually used to starting off with tapas and then going and eating dinner at 11:30 at night, And yes, everything is mañana. It's tomorrow, which is relaxing. It really is.
Yeah.
But maybe not in business.
Yeah, I think we might need a little bit more of that relaxation vibe to be incorporated over here. Not too much, but definitely a little bit wouldn't hurt. Because it seems like culturally things can get a little bit too go, 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 hustle, 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 to the point where, I mean, it kind of takes away from enjoying life itself. And I think it's kind of like a slippery slope to get yourself into that kind of mindset.
I think so. I'd agree. I think one of the catalysts for why I started to take off to travel and try to have a travel life was when I was working in San Francisco, and I worked for a wealthy family as a private chef and family assistant, and they had high-powered jobs and were very stressed all the time. And so that rubbed off on the household. And then I'm sitting in traffic going across the bridge back over to, Marin, where I lived. And it was a lot of stress. And finally, one day I just said, no, not for me. And that's when it was the catalyst really to kind of take off and travel, and found work online so I could be able to do that. Yeah.
Well, I love that you did do that. And I love how your overall approach is, as somebody who's interested in symbolism and esoteric subject matters. It's really cool just to have anybody out there actually on site looking at things, documenting, giving their perspectives. That's the kind of really informative information that is really nice for someone like myself who is just interested in these subjects and wants to find people that are actually out there doing exactly what you're doing. So I really appreciate it. With that said, is there anything else that you want to bring up or throw out there, or any last messages or thoughts that you just want to put out there for the listeners before we wrap it up?
Just basically that living the travel lifestyle is not for everybody. It's not perfect all the time, but it can be a really joyous experience, and it can definitely help you understand yourself and help you understand other cultures more deeply. I know for me, I'm kind of making a full circle here. I started out really wanting to just go see other countries and other lands, and now I'm bringing it back to my home country. And so I'm very excited to be able to maybe look at symbolism and understand some more aspects of my own country now that I've been gone for 5-7 years.
Yeah, definitely. Well, actually, there's one more thing I want to ask you.
Uh-huh.
Have you ever encountered any like dangerous, like super sketchy situations out there?
Let's see. Yes. When I was in my 20s traveling, there was some sketchy stuff going on a side alleyway at a hostel that I was staying at. Down below, lots of drug dealing, prostitution. I think somebody got stabbed. So that was a bit scary, but I did have a male chaperone with me. So that was less scary. Anything else? No, I've always felt really safe usually. And you just have to use your mind, use your head, be aware of your surroundings, and you'll be good. Just don't go out there with too much fear, because you're probably going to bring it to yourself. And then it's going to put a damper on your experience.
All right. Well, where would you direct people to find out more about yourself or learn more about what you're up to?
Yes, I have a website. It's called www.thesymbolicnomad.wixsite.com/global nomad. And I also have an Instagram page that is global_nomad_life.
Awesome. Well, Susie, you're amazing. I appreciate you and I appreciate your mind. So thank you again, and let's do this again sometime.
Okay, great.